No question is more vexatious and familiar for Israelis than the question, what are you first, Jewish or Israeli? The late Israeli humorist and politician Uri Orbach once wrote, that's more or less like asking me, what are you more, a man with glasses or a man with a mustache? Nevertheless, this question is familiar to any Israeli who has been a member of a youth movement, engaged in a dialogue about Israeli and or Jewish identity, been through an IDF course, or traveled abroad as a shaliach, an emissary of a Jewish organization. In short, it is familiar to almost every Jew in Israel. Like the question of whether you love your mother or father more, which is almost never asked, or whether Israel should be a Jewish or a democratic state, which is asked all the time. The question of Israeli versus Jewish forces Israelis to choose when it is not clear that a choice exists.
Hello and welcome. My name is Shmuel Rosner and I'm a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute, JPPI. Our guest today is Professor Ruth Gavison. She is the Chaim H. Cohen Professor Emerita of Human Rights at the Faculty of Law, Hebrew University of Jerusalem.
Indeed.
Did I say it correctly?
Perfect.
Professor Gavison is also the chair of Metzila. She's an activist on many issues, and she's a well-known analyst of Israeli affairs. She won many awards. Do you want to mention some of them?
I think maybe we'll just move on.
We'll just move on. So here's my first question to you. In our study, one of the things that we found is that many Jewish Israelis do not differentiate between them being Jews and being Israelis. For them, Jewishness and Israeliness are one and the same. Can you confirm that this is the situation, and what complication such situation makes?
Well, first, I think that it is indeed the case, but it's usually the case with many people who don't really ask about their identities and components of their identities. They take their identities more or less for granted. And I think that for most Jews in Israel, when they're not in a very reflective mode, Israeliness and their Jewishness do go together. And it is related to the fact that Israel, in the imagination and the intuitive definition of most Jews and non-Jews in Israel and abroad, is the Jewish state. So being Israelis and being Jews is very similar. But as you said, this is very complicated because there is a question about what is Judaism, who is a Jew, but is also a question about what is Israeliness. Is it a cultural identity? Is it a citizenship? And if it's citizenship, about 20% of Israel's citizens are non-Jews. Most of them are Arabs, Muslims, and Christians, but some of them are other kinds of minorities, including Christian minorities of European origin, and the whole picture is very, very complicated. There is also the issue that there are many Jews. I mean, today, Jews in Israel is about, say, almost 40% of the Jewish communities all over the world, but
Right.
there are still 60% of the Jews are not Israelis. So the distinction is critical on many, many, many levels.
Right. So basically, you say this complicates our relations, namely Israeli Jews, our relations with Israeli non-Jews or non-Jewish Israelis. It also complicates our relations with Jews who aren't Israelis because for many of us, Israeli Jews, the culture is becoming a mixture of two things that cannot work for everybody. Would you say that there are also advantages to the fact that Jewish Israelis see Jewishness and Israeliness as one cohesive culture?
Yes, clearly. Because part of the main importance of Israel, as far as I'm concerned, as a Zionist, is that Israel was designed and is functioning, more or less, as the only place in the world in which Jews, in many, many, many definitions of Jewishness and attitudes to religion and religiosity and Judaism, that Jews feel that Israel is the one place in which they're the majority and they therefore enjoy some power that they don't have as guests in hosting cultures and countries. They have the responsibility and the right to what is called self-determine. And among other things, what they self-determine is the meaning of the Jewishness of this collective that they have created here. And I think that this is indeed very important, and the fact that they do feel that they are more or less Jews and Israeli in interchangeable ways means that there is a level of success in this project of trying to create an internal Israeli-Jewish solidarity, which is something that is very important for the strength and robustness of Israeli society, and is something that is also very challenged by internal differences and debates, both within Jews and between Jews and non-Jews in Israel.
Right. We know that many early Zionists aspired to create what they would call a new Jew. So this is what we see here? That's the new Jew?
No. I think that, people who wanted to destroy the old world and create a new world usually fail. Because the old world is extremely persistent, and it's the habits and the cultures and the land and the memories and the families and traditionalism and all kinds of very, very, very important factors, which usually are not only dictated by history and ideology, they're also dictated by interests and economic and social needs and things like that. So I don't believe in this newness as a possibility. But I do think that there was something extremely revolutionary in secular Zionism, which did include, and to some extent successfully, a basic change in the general Jewish attitude to life. And to some extent, this is successful, but obviously not completely, because there is, in fact, you may say today in Israel, a much larger tendency of Israeli Jews to accept traditionalism and religion, both as something that many, many, many people who live here feel is central to their identity, which wasn't the case in the early days of revolutionary Zionism, but also in an acceptance, which is still a struggle, very much a struggle, a cultural war, an acceptance that there is an issue for Zionism, even secular Zionism, with an attempt to dilute the Jewish and religious sources of identity. I think the nation-state law is concerned with both the question of Jewish solidarity, which is eroded and challenged in new ways, and the question of civic solidarity across the line of Jews, non-Jews.
And the nation-state basic law, this is exactly what we are talking about. It's an attempt to enshrine the Jewishness of the state within Israeli law.
Yes, but the debate about what the law seeks to do and is doing, and whether it's good or bad that it does do that, is precisely on the question whether it only addresses the Jewish, non-Jewish tension, or whether it also addresses, and in what way, the internal Jewish tension. I think that it's a mistake to see the nation-state law as just a statement about Jews, non-Jews. I think the nation-state law, despite the fact that it is primarily dealing with the Jewish, non-Jewish challenge, I think that part of the debate within Israel and within Jewish communities all over the world about this law is precisely about its implications for the civic solidarity, the demos, the all citizens of Israel, that some people say this law totally disregards. So I think it's the two things together.
So let me take this issue and try to make it somewhat more concrete. We're talking about ideas. Let's take a day such as Independence Day. On Independence Day, do we celebrate a Jewish holiday or an Israeli civic event?
Well, in this case, it's lucky because there isn't in the tradition a Jewish religious holiday in Yom Ha'atzmaut. Yom Ha'atzmaut is a new, Israel-based day. But clearly, for those Jews, especially religious Jews, who see the establishment of the State of Israel as something of religious meaning, then Independence Day is also a day with deep religious significance.
And it also touches on the question of what exactly is Jewishness today, because, to take another day as example, and we discuss it at length in our book, National Memorial Day. We begin Memorial Day with a ceremony near the Western Wall, a Jewish site. We recite the Kaddish. We say Jewish prayers. We use Jewish symbols to signify Memorial Day. Now, many countries in the world have Memorial Days, and these are days in which the state mourns the people who died to defend the state. In Israel, this mix of Jewish culture, Jewish tradition, and Israeli civic holidays or events is very vivid. It's very clear.
I agree, but I think that it's good for the complexity of the situation to remind ourselves that there are civil society organizations in Israel who challenge and want to work precisely on trying to create a distinction between these two meanings. For instance, there is now an arrangement that the IDF allowed that people who want to bury their soldiers, fallen soldiers, in the military cemeteries will be allowed to do that in a non-religious ceremony. So that the distinction is, yes, I'm a soldier, I am a Jewish soldier. I fell to defend this country, but I resist the implication that when I die for this country, this is something related to the Jewish religion. But I think that the power of your analysis is not only the fact that you are saying, I think rightly so, that say 60% or 65% of the Jewish population of Israel sees itself as both Jewish and Israeli in very strong, powerful terms. But then there are those who, A, don't really want to be affiliated with Judaism at all, either as a national or a religious, distinct. And this is a small group, very vocal, but a small group. And then you look at the other kind of two groups. One of them that wants to see Judaism is very important, but insists that the Judaism is really religious.
A religion.
And,
right.
and minimize or even negate or deny the non-religious ethnic
national meaning of
yes, meaning of Judaism. And then there are those who, for them, it's very important that it is together with strong religiosity. But the majority of the people are not like that. And I think this is a very important finding.
Would you agree that one of the things that are still ambiguous in Israeli society is what exactly is Judaism, whether we refer to a religion or to something?
The only reason that you have managed to find this majority is because the answers to these questions is vague. And I think what you show very clearly and very powerfully and very persuasively is that when you let the people live, they find ways of mitigating the demands of Jewish halakha and the demands of, non-universal attachments and all of these. You find a way, the wisdom of the life of many people with different attitudes. There is a willingness in this large group of Central Jews to try and find ways in which the variety and pluralism of Jewish attitudes may be contained so that Jewish solidarity will be both more inclusive and much weaker, much less distinctive. So it's part and part of the same process. The process is we are less observant, we are less rigid in terms of religion, but we are not
Less
assimilating.
Jewish. We are
yes,
not less
we are
Jewish.
not assimilating. And in a way, most of the people in the center don't like, even people of their own attitude, to impose the strictness of their attitude over the other.
Would you attribute the same analysis to not to Jewishness but rather to Israeliness? That it is better if we don't find a clear definition for Israeliness and just say everybody's included, and everybody can have their own interpretation of it, and we can just move forward in our society without having to say, oh, here Judaism stops and Israeli begins, or here Israeli stop and Judaism begins, etc.
Among Jews in Israel, there is a debate about what is and should be the Jewishness of Israel. But there is no real debate about the question whether in some sense it should be Jewish. The real deep debate between Jews and non-Jews is the debate whether there is a justification, continued justification, for Israel to have been founded and continue to be defined and operate as a state which has a Jewish distinction. This is the debate. And the answer of many of the leaders is no. The leaders who are the acknowledged political, social leaders of this community. Actually, many people say that most Arabs in Israel are quite willing to mitigate and to ignore, or at least to bracket, this principle and work for integration and solidarity, civic solidarity.
This is definitely what we see in our surveys, that Arab Israelis are willing more and more to identify themselves as Israelis,
clearly,
and say that they feel comfortable living here and enjoy
yes,
their lives here.
Quite.
Now let's go back to the Jewish tent and the question of tensions within the Jewish tent. And one of the most well-known things that you attempted to do it was more than a decade ago, is to create this big tent that will allow all these expressions of Jewishness to live, to coexist in a less confrontational way. The Gavison Maidan agreement, understanding. Can you describe for our listeners what it is?
Well, the Gavison Maidan covenant is a result of a long process, a couple of years, that involved a discussion between two individuals. Rav Yaakov Maidan from Alon Shvut, one of the yeshiva heads of Alon Shvut today.
Right, Rabbi Yaakov Maidan.
Rabbi Yaakov Maidan, and myself. And the purpose was to try and reach an agreement among Jews, mainly about state and religion issues. So
it's an Orthodox rabbi and a secular law professor attempting to reach some common, to get to a common ground.
An Orthodox settler, right-wing rabbi,
right,
and a left-center, secular, traditional, but definitely not observant,
right,
Jewish woman, trying to reach an agreement about how Jews in Israel should deal with their differences on state and religion issues in a way that will permit them to work together for the benefit of their one state. Part of the idea was that we were accepting that Jews will have and continue to have major differences on their attitudes to religion. The law of the state will implement a solution to these issues like marriage and divorce that will leave people the freedom to do what they need to do and want to do according to their own system of values and beliefs, but will not create a use of the state force in order to force people to take a stand on these issues, which are ideological and moral and political for many people, religious. It will not force them to do so, so that we will agree that the law is going to represent the interests of the states and not of the religious groups and establishments.
Right. Yeah, I would be correct to say that generally speaking, you prefer compromises, understandings, and processes over determination by legal authorities.
It's not only, yes, I do, but it's not only simple determination, it's determination in terms of human rights. I don't want the debate on such issues, whether we should have events with gender separation in public, are they allowed? I don't think that this should be a matter of human rights, so the persons who want separation are against human rights. I don't think it's valuable. I think it's actually counterproductive. Because I think that you need to find a way of respecting what other people think without forcing them to behave as you think people should behave. This is the main crux of the matter. And it's very, very important to see to it that no one should be allowed to enlist the power of the state to say, this is the way and it's the only way. Now, it's not only for Jews. It's also for Jews and Arabs. You do have, because of the special nature of Israel, you do have a solidarity, not only between the Jews of Israel, but also between Jews outside of Israel. I have no doubt in my mind that the existence of the state of Israel as a Jewish state, with all its debates and all the criticisms levied against it, is critical to maintaining Jewish identity for Jews outside of Israel. Critical, very important. I don't know how to imagine what Jewish life would be like without a Jewish state. Okay, so you need that. You need that. And once you understand that this is a critical need, then you do what it takes to maintain these circles of solidarity, as I call them, which are indeed very, very critical. And I think what you're saying in the book, this is why I like it so much, is that you're not normative, you're not prescriptive, but you are saying that life in Israel succeeded, at least to some extent, in creating this shared place in which Jews, because you were looking only at Jews,
right,
but it's also true for Jews and non-Jews, but for Jews, living together does create modes of modus vivendi and mitigation and acceptance and doing things in similar ways and live and let live, that the best covenants and the worst laws cannot either generate or undermine. So I think to some extent there is a success, but this is a success that we need to protect all the time by giving people the sense of the benefits of doing things this way rather than the other way.
There's no better way to end our conversation. Professor Gavison, thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.